My name is Jonathan Prentice. I'm the head of the Secretariat of the United Nations Network on Migration, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this GCM talk on migrants and discrimination, lessons for the future. On the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination earlier this year, on the 21st of March, the network emphasized that equality and non-discrimination are a cornerstone of the Global Compact on Migration to be reflected in migration policies and practices at all levels. These commitments notwithstanding, the first years of the Compact's implementation, including during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, exposed the existing inequalities faced by many migrants, including discriminatory barriers to accessing services and intensified narratives of intolerance focused on migrants and diasporas. Yet at the same time, public discourses on the contributions of essential workers highlighted the ways in which migrants and diasporas significantly contributed to recovery efforts, and yet, I repeat, were excluded in accessing services and relief. Drawing on the Global Compact's commitments to combat inequalities, the network has established work streams, firstly on addressing efforts to combat racism, xenophobia, and intolerance, and also on addressing discrimination on the basis of gender. For these anti-discrimination efforts to reflect realities and have lasting impact, an intersectional approach is vital, taking into account grounds of discrimination such as sex, gender, age, migratory status, and race. And so today, the network is proud to launch the Anti-Discrimination and COVID-19 Advocacy Tool. Though emerging from the inequalities exposed during the pandemic, the tool looks to the future and provides ways to address structural discrimination and other barriers to equality faced by migrants, and provides a range of ways by which these barriers can be dismantled. So today's GCM talk seeks to continue a dialogue on combating discrimination against migrants, and your views on its utility and your willingness to embrace this guidance will be essential. This tool, this advocacy tool, has no meaning if it is confined to Geneva. And I'm thus very pleased to welcome today's experts and practitioners who will raise examples of practices and policies that seek to end discrimination and promote equality. Let's recall also that today's discussion is grounded in the International Migration Review Forum's Progress Declaration, in which member states committed to eliminating all forms of discrimination, as well as negative stereotyping and misleading narratives that generate negative perceptions on migration and migrants. These commitments, together with the guiding principles of the Compact itself, provide the basis for the work ahead, ensuring that we keep people at the center of our thoughts, that our work is rooted in international law and the collective commitment to upholding human rights, and that we emphasize cooperation and partnership. I hope that this discussion will offer a dynamic space for discussing these issues in a way that generates new thinking, new partnerships for this vital task of eliminating discrimination and promoting equality for migrants and all members of society. With that, I wish everyone a very fruitful event, and it's my great pleasure to introduce the first presenter, Stella Opoku-Owusu, who is the director of the Africa Foundation for Development, goes by the acronym of AFFORD. Stella, please.
Jonathan, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see so many people here. It's really good to see that and the interest in this tool. And Jonathan has introduced me already. Thank you. Just to also add that Afford is a diaspora and development organization, and Afford's role also as a co-lead of the anti-discrimination work stream with a network, and it's also a member of the Civil Society Action Committee and Mechanism, and those are quite linked in terms of the role that we play with a network on the work stream. This piece of work, i.e. the advocacy tool, was delivered between 2021 and 2022 under the guidance of the Network on Migration and the co-leads at the time of what was then the gender and the race work stream, being Afford and UNW or UN Women. The publication was delivered over a very short time frame with the understanding that as an advocacy tool, it could provide the basis for the next phase of work for the tool, depending on the feedback from the stakeholders and what might be useful to them, to all of you, essentially. In developing the publication, we looked at the importance of providing an intersectional lens to gender and to race as the focal points of discrimination in the tool. But we were also very much aware of not masking significant issues that are faced by migrants within each of these discrimination themes on their own. And so the publication sought to do 2 or 3 things. One was to initially have a look at race and discrimination on its own, gender and discrimination on its own, and then it looks at the intersectionality of these two and what it means for migrants, and where this interconnected also with COVID-19 policies at the time. The tool then goes on to offer a snapshot of issues, challenges, and promising practices across the regions, providing some very promising examples. One of the key objectives was also to demonstrate how discrimination related to gender and race shows up in different regions. The tool, of course, it points to some examples, but we believe that this is perhaps a further piece of work that is also needed and could be beneficial for all stakeholders and for member states. So overall, the tool basically does 3 key things. One is to provide a snapshot of issues and challenges that are related to gender and race discrimination as experienced by migrants across the regions. Secondly, it considers how COVID-19 policies and responses may have interacted with other migration, race, and or gender-related policies, and where these may then have impacted on social determinants of health. So these include income, employment, education, access to other the services, and so on. And then thirdly, it provides examples of promising practices and processes which are developed by stakeholders that may inform and inspire others looking to improve outcomes for migrants. The tool is really not meant to be comprehensive, i.e. it's not meant to demonstrate numerous examples across different regions, but rather it highlights significant gaps and issues that were exacerbated due to the pandemic, as well as those that are overlooked when migrants are treated as a homogeneous group. The examples cover some examples of, in terms of thematic areas that it actually covers, are related to limited access to data, misinformation, health, racist violence, xenophobia, gender-based violence, domestic work and care work, migration policy governance, housing, digitalization, education, and so on. The tool also then goes on to provide useful resources that are related to these experiences. And then it provides responses and promising practices. And this is where it gets really interesting and exciting. And under this, you've got some of the thematic headings with regional and national examples, such as the OHCHR named best practices in Singapore, Canada, Belgium, Tunisia, Bangladesh, Mexico. And then there are also some civil society examples in or involving CSOs from the Philippines, India, and Bangladesh, Kenya, Nigeria, and the DRC. And this is just to name a few. I think what's really important also for today's discussion and for the launch is that the context of the tool and its relevance for the future is absolutely critical. In the tool, we have comments from the Secretary General, which I referred to, where in his report on the GCM, he notes that many of the challenges faced during the pandemic predates the pandemic. So we could also add that the pandemic exacerbated those challenges and it made them a lot more obvious. And also, if these predated the pandemic, then these are definitely still issues that we grapple with. The guiding principles also allude to this contextualization, that it's not just limited to this specific pandemic. And if I can just quote from just one of the many guiding principles that we have in the publication, it talks about global inequalities, gender inequalities, the impact of historical legacies of enslavement and colonialism and systemic racism, as well as climate change, can interact as drivers of migration, amongst others. An intersectional approach does need to consider and to examine historical inequalities and structures, including social and political structures, for evidence of built-in racism and xenophobia, and not just the cumulative disadvantages or injustices that are posed by the pandemic. So this really does also point to wider systemic challenges of discrimination that continue to impact on migrants. And I would also add also on multi-generational diaspora communities within this context as well. And these basically continue to plague us. The pandemic has simply highlighted, highlighted the challenges even more. So in terms of the next steps of this work, they start today with the launch of the tool. And in communicating this to all stakeholders, we also wanted to get a sense from all of you of where you see the priorities. We can't do everything, of course, but which areas are we able to prioritize going forward? What do you want to prioritize that the tool can actually support with? How can the network support you to further the use of the tool? How can we make this much more relevant to regional and country, like networks? Should we also be looking at how these forms of discrimination show up in different regions and provide more practices on where these have been addressed, successfully in other regions? So this really is the space for your feedback on the next steps, and we look forward to your input. So on that note, I am going to now pass on to Jenna Hennebury, who is the co-lead for the gender workstream, who were also a big part of developing the work on this advocacy tool in 2021-2022. So I'll pass on to Jenna to also present on the tool. Thank you. Over to you, Jenna.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Stella, and Jonathan, and the network for highlighting this tool and for bringing us all together, and for the opportunity to speak today. As you know, I'm the founder of the Gender Plus Migration Hub, as introduced, and I'm also the co-lead of the gender workstream of the network, along with UN Women, who were key in the development of this advocacy tool. And my colleagues couldn't be here today to speak, but certainly we're very much involved in the development of this tool. And the reason for that is at the outset, I think, well, I don't know the exact reason, but I think the logic behind that is clearly discrimination happens in a way that is intersectional. I'll just say that now, and then I'm going to come back to it a couple times. And I think that the leads on this fully recognize that, and that discrimination seems to know no boundaries at times. So the gender workstream, just to spend a second talking about that, is this multi-stakeholder group under the network. And it really does bring together some really committed individuals to work on issues around anti-discrimination and equality throughout migration. And we really adopt an intersectional approach to the work. And I think it's important because both work streams are important because they recognize this intersectionality, and also that the multiple identities of migrants that intersect across multiple identities of migrants and create the unequal conditions and outcomes of migration. It's those unequal conditions I would like to start with in my broader reflections today. I would like to start actually by borrowing a little bit from the work of my exceptional colleague, Dr. Shaughnessy Brown, whose recent work really resonated with me. And so I wanted to share something a little bit different as a start. She highlights a poem called Home by Warshan Shire in her recent work, a British Somali poet born in Kenya, that sheds light on the conditions under which African women abandon their homes, sexual and gender-based violence, gender discrimination, threats to personal security, human rights violations, lack of sustainable livelihoods, to name a few. And many African women migrate to flee these conditions, and many face journeys with increased risks along the way of those very same factors. They cross the continent to migrate, or as she says, to seek freedom through irregular pathways. And the poet poignantly states, you have to understand, no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. The poem and my colleagues' work is pointing us to recognize the humanity of migrants and the inhumanity of a system which structures their mobility to fail or to be blocked. It's also a reminder of the increasingly complex and intersecting drivers of migration and the harsh conditions of migration that people experience when regular pathways are not available to them. Migration in the context of discrimination and equality will not inherently lead to empowerment or equality. Without purposeful intervention, then migration born out of inequality will perpetuate inequality. And the intersecting drivers of migration, inequality of drivers of migration will continue. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that the coming together here today and this tool is about recognizing that migration does not pose equal promise or equal risks, and action needs to happen to change that. We know for many women and LGBTIQ plus people, and Black and racialized people, migration actually means risk. It means encountering risk to personal security, to income security, to human rights violations, etc. And whether migrating irregularly or regularly through labor migration programs, there is a heightened risk to racialized women who are largely concentrated in unprotected and underregulated sectors. So we saw during the pandemic that many women migrants face loss of employment, greater debts, alongside increased exposures to COVID, violence and xenophobia, often with migrants, racialized migrants perceived as visible or more visible carriers of the virus. And indeed, I think, what COVID tells us is, and we know this now, that it highlighted but also exacerbated existing inequalities. But we don't need to look to the pandemic to see the outcomes of a system that is steeped in gender and racial discrimination. We have a global system of migration that is having consequences that are uneven for migrants. And this is why we need this tool. The tool and this conversation on the heels of the Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination is not to highlight what should have been done during the pandemic, but instead to provide tools to address the long-standing systemic discrimination, racism, and gender inequality that underpins migration, and instead to ensure that we can address these structural level changes that are needed right now, and to respond to new challenges in ways that don't do more harm in the future. Practically speaking, I think the tool and the coming together of those of us and the formation of the network itself are key, and will move us from the realm of ideas to that of impact. The tool, as you see, has practical guidance and resources for stakeholders. It connects up with other resources available in the network hub. It makes linkages to other resources such as our own Gender Plus Migration Hub, and it really reminds us of what actions can be taken, specific actions that can be taken. For example, we know that when there's recognition in social legal systems and protection in the legal system against discrimination, when there's an anti-discrimination law, we know that that applies equally to migrants and non-migrants. We know that women and racialized migrants will face greater ability to access employment and to counter experiences of migration, to have recourse in the law. To counter experiences of discrimination, and to have recourse in the law. So today we're sharing this amazing tool and other resources such as those I've mentioned, the Gender Plus Migration Hub and others that exist. I think it's the UN Women's Policy and Practices Guide, I know, informed also the development of this tool. But it's going to take so much more than a sharing of tools. It's going to take the uptake of these tools. And I think that's part of why we're here today. It's going to take active engagement of leaders from civil society and, of course, leadership from governments, which brings me to the close of my statement and the introduction of our next two speakers. We are honored to have a representative, not just any representative, but the amazing Stephanie Leung, who's the Director of International and Intergovernmental Relations for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, who I would like to describe as a lightning rod of advocacy for gender-based approaches to migration in the federal government from Canada, who will speak to the ways that Canada has embedded an approach to intersectionality in the federal government. And also the incredible Paula Cement, who is from the Women in Migration Network, which is a civil society organization whose leadership has actually shaped the language and informed the debate on gender and migration and intersectional approaches, and has highlighted the voices of women in migration throughout the formation of the GCM to today. They will both help us, I hope, move from the realm of ideas to the realm of impact. And Stephanie Leung, welcome and nice to see you. I will give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Jenna. I hope you can hear me. And if not, please let me know. Oh, someone might need to be on mute for a second. There you go. Hello, everyone. And thank you again, Jenna. And of course, thank you for the network for putting on this event and inviting me to speak. And of course, it is such important work that you're doing on raising awareness on the many intersecting ways that migrants face discrimination. And of course, in Canada, we're not immune to any of this, especially during the course of the pandemic. We saw many similar challenges. We experienced heightened xenophobia. Of course, the movement amongst across borders were restricted. In particular, we know that many migrants here in Canada lost employment disproportionately compared to the Canadian-born or those who've been in Canada for a very long time in terms of immigrants. And of course, there are also many others who are migrants who were on the front lines working in essential positions such as the healthcare sector or the food production sector. So the anti-discrimination tool presented today really does help us better understand the challenges faced by migrants during the pandemic, the gaps in services and supports and protections, and of course, most importantly, as Jenna had mentioned, concrete action. What can we do better in the future? And the tools do bring to light that need to recognize the many intersecting factors that contribute to the lived experiences of migrants. So you may have already heard the Canadian government talk about our approach to gender and intersectionality. We have something called the Gender-Based Analysis Plus, and it's an analytical tool that helps us when we look at developing policies and programs and legislation, and of course also in its implementation on how to make sure that considerations of gender and intersectional identity is really baked in to developing government policies, government programs. And the plus in GBA plus, Gender-Based Analysis Plus, acknowledges that intersectionality of the multiple identity factors with gender, so such as race, ethnicity, religion, age, mental or physical abilities, and how they interact, and how these influence, of course, also how people experience government actions differently. And we know that, due to many of these factors, unfortunately, there are structural or systemic conditions that create barriers for some and opportunities for others. So it's a very, very nuanced, and we want to, keep maturing that approach and figuring out how it all works and how perhaps how it ought to work as well. So gender-based analysis plus for the Government of Canada is a federal policy. It is to be applied across all aspects of the Government of Canada's work. It has been in place for a couple of years, but there is still so much work to be done to consistently apply this lens, to make concrete differences and to ensure that the government's work continues to be responsive, inclusive, and reflective of diverse experiences and intersectional factors. And of course, addressing inequalities and inequities and barriers for better outcomes. So we all want to drive to the concrete, how does this make a difference and how should it make a difference? So in terms of domestically, Canada, actually, we've recently put out an anti-racism strategy. So this is domestic. And the government has been very strong in wanting to stand up against discrimination, and that we don't want discrimination against on the basis of religion or ethnicity. And there's a commitment to engage with the public here in Canada. There's been a lot of sort of cross-country consultations done in order to build a strategy. And we're looking at sort of pillars of data and evidence. We're looking at public education on that as well, looking at also combating and addressing hate crimes online as well. So there's quite some work done that's being done there. It's still, I think, fairly, getting off the ground, but it's, I think, powerful to know that Canada has an anti-racism strategy in place. Back onto more migration matters. For migration domestically here, we have something called the Immigration Matters campaign. And this is a communication campaign that supports combating anti-immigrants or anti-migrant rhetoric by highlighting contributions of migrants and refugees to Canada. So it combines storytelling and data, as well as in-person community conversations, so that it becomes more interactive, more applicable perhaps to those who hear the messages and learn more about what migrants and refugees are doing in their own local communities. There's of course a lot of public opinion research to continue to keep the pulse on public attitudes and to measure behavioral changes. And it's a longitudinal study as well. So the same questions get asked every time. And we have a way to measure how there may be differences throughout time, and also cross-check, perhaps events that have happened or something that's been done that may have spurred changes in public opinion. So new questions can be added, especially during the pandemic. We added new questions as well, which allow us to explore some emerging issues. So we've been doing that and trying to track and trying to see, what can we do and what is making a difference. Internationally, of course, we're also very vocal in our support in combating xenophobia and discrimination against migrants. We're supporting It Takes a Community, which is a global media communications campaign. And this also draws on storytelling methods and the power of peer-to-peer networking to engage diverse stakeholders across the world, different regions, locally as well, to talk about what is the positive impact of migration, the contributions, and really, changing that narrative and making sure that we counter negative narrative on migration. And it does seek to elevate that positive side and to bring those stories to the fore and to bring also facts and data to the fore as well. So this initiative was developed in 2022, and it's with the help of many members of the Global Forum on Migration and Development, the GFMD, community of practice and outside experts. So we're very thankful to our co-chairs, the Government of Ecuador, and the Mayor's Mechanism of the GFMD for their continuous support, as well as many, many participants on the working group that continue to connect those experiences, stories, and good practices around the world, really, with communication practitioners on that messaging and that positive narrative. So if you're interested in all this, I really do invite you to join these conversations. And we'll put up the website on the chat so that you can have a sense of what that work is. And I just want to make a plug too, because if you're interested in this sort of narratives aspects of countering xenophobia and countering discrimination. Related to the GFMD, Canada and the Philippines are both co-chairing a roundtable on improving narratives on refugees and on migrants. And in this roundtable, we are definitely looking to engage, as many members and many interested parties as possible, and to really share those best practices, and to look at also where there are regional differences, but also maybe where there are regional similarities as well, and to learn from each other and to connect each other to each other's work. This could be very, very challenging work. So I think we recognize that building that network is an important space and an important time for dialogue as well. So again, we're going to put some information in the Zoom chats, but I really hope that this might be of interest to you and something that you might want to connect you or your interested partners in as well. So we have talked a lot about, narratives and the things that we do, but at the very core of it, going back to intersectionality and anti-discrimination and combating xenophobia, we know that if we don't recognize the intersectional realities of migrant experiences, we do risk designing migration policies and programs that do not achieve their goals because they neglect the differentiated needs of migrants and of refugees. And of course, worse is that if we ignore or if we, don't do anything about it, these will increase vulnerabilities or exacerbate systemic inequalities. And that's definitely not what we as the government of Canada would want to have anything to do with. And we really want to be on that inclusive and that reflective side of approaching our policies and programs. So we do, I do truly, cannot I cannot overstate the importance of this work. And the tool that's being presented by the network today really is a great part of the toolkit, add on all these best practices and all these ways that we can move forward in recognizing how government programs and policies impact migrants, and that with that intersectional lens, we can do better and that we can inform that, future policymaking and response to crises. So thank you for this time, and back to you, Jenna.
Thanks, Stephanie. I love the phrase that you have anti-racism and gender baked in to the approach taken by the Canadian government. That's amazing. I'm sure we'll have lots of discussion about that in following our next speaker as well when we get into the discussion period. So I'll just take a second, reintroduce with our colleague here, Paula Ciment, who is the project coordinator for Women in Migration Network. And I will turn the floor over to you, Paula, to share your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. And also, well, I'm very pleased to be here today with this big, great audience in this series of talks, GCM talks. And also, I think it is very relevant that civil society is included as part of the panelists today. And I take this opportunity to share our experiences, and also that we are part of the gender workstream of the UN Migration Network that has worked together with the racial discrimination workstream to elaborate this tool, this advocacy tool. And it's a pleasure for us to be part of this launch today. And we salute the inclusion of civil society as part of the advocacy tool. It is key to include all stakeholders to promote initiatives for the implementation of the Global Compact on Migration to address intersectional and multiple discriminations. And we also salute that the advocacy tool is the outcome of collaboration of the gender and the racial discrimination work streams, which enhances the use of intersectional approach as part of the UN Migration Network's work. During 2020 and 2022, WIM convened several virtual spaces for dialogues to engage and explore with organizations and activists on how to practice a feminist and intersectional approach to migration. And I wanted to share this experience to you as how to put intersectional approach into practice and for movement building. So We held these dialogues on intersectionality and migration in 5 regional dialogues in Latin America, Africa, Asia, Middle East and North Africa, and Europe. And we convened a total of 125 organizations and activists from a broad spectrum of social movements, including migrant rights, self-organized migrant women, feminist, labor, LGBTIQ, indigenous, and anti-racist groups. The dialogues initiated a discussion process on intersectionality towards making an impact on our daily struggles. And these discussions, I believe that they can contribute to implement the advocacy tool, taking into account civil society stakeholders' needs, demands, and proposals. So I wanted to share today with you some of the emerging insights of the dialogues. The first one is that the intersectional approach contributes to building women's leadership in different movements. This entails sharing power and making space for all voices, thus strengthening the voices of migrant women as political agents in their fight for human rights. It is important that local feminist organizations include migrant women and LGBTIQ+ migrants on their agendas and in their organizations. Moreover, the intersection of gender, race, and migration is key to effective organizing and alliance building. Working in solidarity means collaborating across issues and identities to realize specific aims within feminist movements and broader social movements. Another important insight of the dialogues is that labor exploitation is gender and racialized, and migrant women workers experience multiple oppressions, often working in undervalued sectors such as the care sector and garment industry. We also concluded that there's a need to an understanding of intersectionality grounded in the global South experiences and movements. Despite commonalities, intersectionality is context-related. Multiple oppressions are experienced differently, depending on how power structures operate in each region, country, and community. For this reason, we need to challenge dominant discourse on migration and decolonize the discourse on migration policies. The terminology also is important, but it's more important what it means in practice. So how we apply this concept, this framework, and also the advocacy tool, it can be changed depending on practical and diverse contexts. This means starting from concrete political contexts and histories. As we were talking about the different narratives that we can face. We must center those realities rather than more abstract theory, to take a bottom-up approach grounded in real experiences and movements. Finally, climate change, gender, and migration create intersectional challenges that need to be made more visible and addressed in policy. So climate change also was part of our discussions on intersectionality. And strategies to address the climate crisis must acknowledge the interconnections of gender, racial, and climate injustice as land and livelihoods are impacted and people forced to move. So these discussions complement the examples on civil society initiatives addressing discrimination by intersectional practices and organizing. I wanted to also share with you some specific experiences that can inform the GCM implementation and can complement the advocacy tool. These initiatives include migrant women agricultural workers from Moroccan origin working in southern Spain that has self-organized to face exploitative conditions. They have a feminist and anti-racist discourse to face these demands. Also, the articulation of Black Alliance for Just Immigration, Banji, and Instituto para las Mujeres en la Migración, IMUMI, in Mexico, that they have put together a report to document racial discrimination against African migrants at the Mexico's southern border. Another initiative is to mobilizing against exploitation and wage theft of migrant women workers that can unite feminist, labor rights, and migrant rights groups. This is the case of the movement to abolish the kafala sponsorship system, which ties workers to their employers, limits their mobility and their capacity to claim rights and report violations. it infringes the basic labor rights of migrant women domestic workers. In this case, the International Domestic Workers Federation, MigrantRights.org, and the anti-racist movement are among the groups that mobilized to end the kafala system in the Gulf countries and other countries in the Middle East, such as Lebanon. Also, another initiative of intersectional organizing, it's in India, the informal women workers that are led by Self-Employed Women's Association, SIWA, have joined other social movements, including trade unions and women's rights movements, to mobilize against the caste system. And finally, agricultural workers have organized as a response to climate change events. For example, Honduran agricultural women workers from the banana sector affected by hurricanes have organized to avoid wage theft. So the above mentioned initiatives show how an intersectional feminist approach to movement building is critical for working across movements and for collective political action. This means breaking through the narrow confines of silos to identify systemic inequalities, common ground, and promote cross-sectoral alliances for movement building and organizing against discrimination and inequalities. So we hope that this experience, that bringing the intersectional approach in practice from the ground, can also contribute to the implementation of this advocacy tool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula. And good morning, good afternoon, everybody. That's my turn to welcome all the participants to our discussion today. I hope you can hear me and see me well. My name is Rita Izsákjai, and I'm a senior advisor on anti-racism in UNDP. And I want to thank our speakers so far today, Jonathan, Stella, Jenna, Stephanie, and Paula, for introducing the framework and the topic of the discussion today, also for highlighting the good practices, the good promises. I think we all need that. I must say that UNDP is the co-lead together with AFORD, and you have already met Stella today, of the anti-racism work stream. And I have a brilliant colleague, Monica Perufo, who is not with us today, unfortunately, because she's on a very important mission. And so I am here today to help us having an interactive discussion. I would like to note that we have a little bit of delay in the program, which means that we're going to have about 35 minutes for discussion and then maybe 10 minutes for the closing. And I'd like to recall that you already received, or hopefully you have seen, the guiding questions in the concept note. I will just briefly read them up. So we are looking into discussing how can an intersectional lens be used in policy making to better address the multiple and intersectional forms of discrimination faced by migrants. We will be discussing examples of promising practices and solutions to combat discrimination against migrants. And we should also spend time to talk together about how can this anti-discrimination advocacy to be operationalized at the country and regional levels by governments and stakeholders to address intersectional discrimination as part of the GCM implementation. So I would like to encourage everybody who wants to take the floor to raise your hands. I have some really kind colleagues who will also monitor the screen. So we are going to call you as you are raising your hands. We already have, of course, some who indicated in advance that they would like to take the floor. And so I don't want to waste time because we are already a bit behind, as I said. So let me call the first speaker, who will be Miss Christine Leilani Ersal. And she's the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of the Philippines in Geneva. The floor is yours, madam.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope that you can hear me. Good afternoon,
Very well.
colleagues. Yes, so we would like to thank the network for organizing this very timely and relevant discussion. And as you know, the Philippines is a migrant country of origin. We have observed and recorded how Asian migrants have been subjected to discrimination, fear, violence, including during the pandemic. And we believe that these experiences inform us of the urgency of interstate cross-sectoral cooperation in all cycles of migration from countries of origin, transit, and destination. So Well, in doing so, we can build an already existing mechanisms, including the following, which is first, elements urging for non-discrimination could already be found in the GCM, including in objectives 7, 10, 16, 17, and so on. And the Progress Declaration provides clear guidance for concrete actions, such as eliminating all forms of discrimination through legislation, public discourse, and multi-stakeholder cooperation. Second, the Global Forum on Migration and Development has also done excellent and consistent work in terms of providing spaces to discuss active promotion of balanced narratives on migration. Francis, the current chair, identified this as one of the key priorities with a dedicated roundtable on improving the perception of migration in public opinion through narratives, culture, emotion, and rational discourse, which is co-chaired by the Philippines and Canada. And third, this issue also demands a human rights-based approach and more attention in the Human Rights Council. We recall that the Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants asserted that a fact-based public narrative on migration is essential, and suggested that human rights-based approach would have a positive impact on the public discourse and facilitate integration of migrants into society by changing the general perception of migration as being a burden and expense to being a shared responsibility and valuable investment. So here in the GCM platform, we can leverage these ongoing initiatives and continue to drive the conversation forward. We believe that our goal at the government level would be to encourage meaningful policy changes to encourage inclusion of all migrants, especially those in vulnerable situations, such as women and children, persons with disabilities, and indigenous peoples. Migration policies can help address the challenge of social integration and entrenching a culture of acceptance and integration, which would require coordinated efforts with the media, CSOs, and other range of actors in our society. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and also for reminding us to the importance of the human rights-based approach, because as we all know, human rights, equality, and non-discrimination are the cornerstone of the GCM. The next speaker will be a counselor from the Permanent Mission of El Salvador in Geneva, Mr. Jose Chavez.
Thank you very much, Mita, for giving me the floor. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. I will switch to Spanish.
Muchas gracias por esta reunión y a los speakers también por todas sus presentaciones. Creemos como Gobierno de El Salvador que la herramienta es sumamente útil para nuestra labor a favor del combate a los aspectos de discriminación en materia migratoria.
Para El Salvador, este tema
es un aspecto fundamental, particularmente en el tema migratorio. Nuestra Constitución, en su artículo número 1, reconoce a la persona humana como el origen y el fin de la actividad del Estado. Y en su artículo 3 establece que el goce de los derechos no podrán establecerse restricciones que se basen en diferencias de nacionalidad, raza, sexo o religión. Por esta razón, el gobierno ha creado planes, proyectos y acciones
a favor que aseguren el goce de la libertad, la
salud,
la cultura, el bienestar económico y la justicia social sin distinción alguna para las personas salvadoreñas o extranjeras en las diferentes
etapas del ciclo migratorio.
Asimismo, nuestras leyes
secundarias están sujetas a combatir cualquier indicio de xenofobia y discriminación que lleven al cometimiento de actos violentos o ilícitos que dañen la integridad de cualquier persona migrante en el territorio.
Por ejemplo, la Ley Especial de Migración y Extranjería,
en su artículo
número 5, reconoce el principio de igualdad, donde se prohíbe el establecimiento de restricciones basadas en
diferencias de raza, sexo, idioma, religión,
situación migratoria o cualquier otra condición social. Y en su artículo 18 menciona que las
personas extranjeras, desde el instante en que ingresan al territorio nacional, gozarán los mismos derechos y garantías que las personas nacionales. Es en este sentido que El Salvador, como fiel promotor del lado humano de la migración, trabaja articuladamente para el reconocimiento y respeto, protección de los derechos humanos de todos los migrantes y sus familias, sin importar su condición migratoria. Por ejemplo, nuestra red diplomática y consular se ha fortalecido para brindar y garantizar el respeto a los derechos fundamentales de nuestra diáspora y de la población migrante. De igual manera, en nuestro territorio se han generado condiciones favorables para que los extranjeros gocen de los derechos en materia económica, sanitaria, laboral, educativa, así como el acceso a la justicia.
Brindando una atención integral a las personas
Extranjeras que se encuentran en tránsito, destino, residencia, temporal o definitiva, en condición especial migratoria o en conflicto en la ley, entre otros.
También en El Salvador no existe la figura de
Centros de detención, más bien se cuenta con un centro de atención integral para personas extranjeras migrantes,
cuyas siglas son CAIPEM, de efecto más bien administrativo,
que brinda apoyo en apego a la ley a resguardar a personas extranjeras que son posibles víctimas de los delitos de trata y tráfico de personas, o solicitantes de asilos, a los cuales también interviene nuestra Comisión para la determinación de la condición de persona refugiada, CODER, con el apoyo de ACNUR.
Por ello, nuestro gobierno
Resalta la importancia de ceñirse al marco jurídico internacional para velar por el respeto de los derechos humanos de las personas migrantes y sus familiares en los países de origen, tránsito, destino y retorno.
e insta a los demás países a que no estigmaticemos
A los migrantes y desvincularlos con la delincuencia y consecuencias negativas. Nuestro gobierno promueve a que no invisibilicemos los sacrificios de los migrantes, ya que detrás de cada persona hay una historia. Por ello, es importante la construcción de decisiones pensadas en aquellos a quienes nos debemos, es decir, los más vulnerables. Muchas gracias por el espacio.
Thank you for your statement and for introducing El Salvador's approaches and practices in this regard and for reminding us of the international standards that should guide us. Thank you. My next speaker will be from Ecuador, Mr. Victor Calderon. Are you here?
Yes, thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for giving me the floor. Do you hear me well?
Perfectly.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, this quick intervention just to first thanking the Secretariat of the Migration Network for organizing this series of events of GCM talks. I think we think that this is really interesting to see how the GCM series of talks are being developed. They are, having important topics such as the one that we are discussing today. And just to echo the representative of Canada and also from the Philippines, in terms of taking or seeing the value in taking into consideration also the work that is being done in other spaces, such as, of course, the toolkit OHHR, and also the GFMD ad hoc working group on migration that is co-chaired by Ecuador, Canada, and the majors mechanism, and also echoing the Canada's comments on the current government roundtable number 5 on the same subject. We think that there's an important value on that. In the Ecuador's presidency in 2019, we started to have this conversation. I think it's very important to keep on trying to maintain the momentum on this issue. And we also would like to stress the importance of having a human rights-based approach, of course, in having a gender-responsive approach, if possible, as is reflected in the anti-discrimination toolkit. We think that that's a really important perspective to have into consideration, and also for thanking the launching of the anti-discrimination and COVID guidelines toolkit. Sorry, because we think that this is important to add value on this conversation. So we will be looking in detail and talk, of course, with colleagues on Capital. But we think that this is a really important issue that we will be as champions of the GCM trying to push forward in the following months and in the future. So thanks so much for the space and yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you so much, and also for your supporting word for the tool. And we do hope that people will utilize it and use it in practical ways. And it's an advocacy tool, right? So it really should lead to actual changes. And so we really hope that it will be operationalized at national level. And also thank you for emphasizing interagency and multi-stakeholder cooperation, because this is essential, of course, for all of us to be as efficient as we can. So thank you for that. And my next speaker will be from the Quakers office in Geneva, and Yasmin Bediati, if you're with us.
Yes.
Apologies
hello.
for the hi Yasmin. The floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the network for organizing this discussion and for the launch of the advocacy tool. And I'm happy to be here and glad that this important conversation is happening. So I will use this opportunity to address issues of racism within the migration governance. As you know, there is no migration justice without racial justice. And as it has been raised by other colleagues here, we must indeed use a lens of intersectionality when addressing issues of discrimination and racism. As you may all know, that racism is an insidious form of structural violence permeating all of society, and its impacts on how migration is perceived and managed and how migrants are treated, ultimately leading to human rights violations and enabling situations of vulnerability. So the lack of awareness of racial discrimination faced by migrants, compounded by a lack of disaggregated data by race, ethnicity, and migratory status, can keep such experiences invisible. And at the Quakers United Nations office, we saw new opportunities during 2022 to pursue racial justice through the UN with the operationalization of the expert mechanism on law enforcement and racism, the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, and obviously the International Migration Review Forum. And we saw steps forward in the IMRF's Progress Declaration, where states have committed to, I quote, eliminate all forms of discrimination, including systemic racism, by reviewing, developing, and implementing relevant legislation, policies, and practices, a commitment that has been building on the objective 17 of the GCM. We also saw steps forward with the EMLR's recommendations on data that can be applied to migration data. And finally, the Permanent Forum ended with the recognition that migration should be a higher profile part of its work in the future. But there is, of course, a lot further to go. There has been a strong call for nothing about us without us at the IMRF. That was echoed by many migrant-led organizations. So if we are serious about this talk, then migrants' expertise and experience should be centered in our discussions to inform effective recommendations. We see next steps, or next steps can include, for instance, using the GCM regional reviews to follow up on the IMRF commitment to enhancing meaningful participation of those directly concerned, as the regional reviews do provide an opportunity to engage meaningfully with migrants and should contribute inputs to the meetings of the corresponding regional economic commission. Further attention by EMLR to the connections between racism, migration status, and human rights violation by law enforcement. Yes, and then there should be also focused discussion at the Permanent Forum leading to specific recommendations on migration governance. And finally, another next step could include that that states can support and advocate at the national level, such as by engaging with migrants themselves, as again, their expertise and experiences are essential to delivering meaningful change. And I will share in the chat a paper that we wrote that offers detailed recommendations for states to deliver on the promise of non-discrimination on the grounds of race in the GCM, in addition to submitting pledges. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for highlighting these new developments and talking about law enforcement, the permanent forum, and for emphasizing so importantly meaningful participation of migrants themselves in these discussions and encouraging member states to also do that. And we are looking forward to your paper, and thanks for having next steps recommended. It's really helpful and we will keep record of that. And my next speaker, if he's here, should be Paul Tacon from ILO. But it was signaled that we are not sure that he's here. Paul Tacon, are you with us? If not, then I will jump to the next one. George Gallo from IOM Costa Rica. Are you here, George Gallo?
Hi, Rita. Yes, I'm here. Thanks a lot.
Okay, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And I just wanted to share very briefly with people attending the meeting an initiative that we are trying to develop here in the Americas, which is sorry. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, this is the Xenophobia Zero community, which is a community where we are inviting everyone who's interested in raising his or her voice against xenophobia. We have already around 300 members, and we hope to take it to a lot more people. Of course, all people attending the meeting are invited to join. And we are making 3 calls to action through this community of action against xenophobia. The first one is that we are calling members to create and share content, positive content about migrants and migration and how they contribute to the communities that host them and that see them live also. As an effort to change narratives against narratives about migration. The second call to action is to act, to make a stand against hate speech that populates social media. But we have created a methodology, and that methodology is not about facing or creating conflict with those who share hate in social media, but instead it is about supporting with empathy people who is attacked because of their positions about migration and migrant and refugees, of course, and to support initiatives and campaigns about the integration of migrants. It is based, if you want, in a very short term. Don't feed the troll, feed the love. Is maybe the principle of that methodology to act. And there is a third call to action to analyze. And we are asking there the members of the community to report xenophobia situations that present in our region. So we can have a map of how xenophobia expresses in the Americas, but also that we can have a lot of evidence, a lot of material on how xenophobia behaves, about the dynamics of the hate speech, and how this hate speech can be fought. And the idea is that that analyzing section can become a repository where governments can find evidence to create actions, to create policies based in evidence to fight xenophobia.
Thank you. Jorge, can we wrap up, please?
Yeah.
Because
no,
we have a lot of speakers waiting. Thank you so much.
I was just about to end, and just to share everyone to join the Xenophobia Zero community, and if I'm going to share my email in the chat for any further questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing with us these 3 calls of action, and also for reminding us, because of course the Progress Declaration also led to pledges about taking action against harmful stereotyping, hate speech and hate crimes. So thank you for also trying to look into how to change narratives and how to show empathy to the affected community. So thank you for this. The next speaker, if he is here, would be from Morocco, United Cities and Local Governments, Lionel Zamba. But again, we are not sure he's here. I will wait a few seconds. If he's not here, then I will pass the floor to Reverend Jack Amick from the United Methodist Committee on Relief. Please forgive me for mispronouncing your names.
You did it perfectly. Yeah, can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you to the UNM, everybody who organized this, and it's a really important topic, as others have identified. There's been some great percolation of ideas in addition to the tool that was presented. So why is an older white guy speaking about this topic? You might notice the irony in that, but I suppose it's because even at this age, when I think I've figured everything out, I'm continuing to be surprised by this phenomenon. I was in a country that will go unnamed, in which a person in a church said, "This is a very old country and it's only for white people." And I just didn't know what to say. So, and I could hear that certainly in this country, I'm sure, quite easily as well. And we do hear that sentiment. So it's a serious problem, but it's also an ancient problem. If you look at the book of Ruth, some scholars have recently pointed out that this is not just a story about loyalty between Naomi and Ruth, but it's also a shift in policy, if you will, around how to treat the Moabites. The Moabites were shunned for a long time, and in this instance, there's a shift in the policy, and it's sort of saying, like, this doesn't make sense. This is dumb. Let's evolve. Let's welcome people who are strangers. And so this, xenophobic practices have been around forever. As another scholar has put recently described or named that all immigration policy, and this was very informative to me, all immigration policy is a reflection of national identity. All immigration policy is a reflection of national identity. And I think that's true the world over. And if that is true, then how does that get shifted? And while I appreciate the top-down stuff that the UN and the member states do, I feel that can't shift unless the attitude of people shift, on people on the ground. And so statistics and data and so forth may convince a few people, but it's not going to be the sea change that we need to get these policies and procedures and such shifted so that people are actually cared for, people who have been through immense suffering, how they get treated well, how they get welcomed. And since welcoming the stranger is an important part of the Judeo-Christian tradition, we feel that this is something that we have to work on. So one of the things we've done, 2 things basically. One of the things that we have done is to develop a small granting system for our churches that allows them to start some sort of migration project in their community. And the idea is that if they do something in their community and they get to know a refugee or a migrant or somebody who's new in their community, it may well invite them into a relationship with that person. And through that relationship, they may learn about things that they never knew about in terms of policies that are just egregious. And then they can become advocates for change. But also they can just learn to welcome people better. And if people begin to do that, then we may have the voice that's required to make change in policy. But I believe it really has to start at the community level. Not exclusive of events like this and conversations like this. So on the other side of things, we have also supported this network in inviting new voices into this forum and making sure someone identified, I'll just finish in a second, that the voices of migrants and refugees are actually in these spaces. So thank you for that, and thank you for your partnership.
Thank you so much. And as you know, one of the objectives of the network is to actually engage with a wide range of partners, with business sector and NHIRs and parliamentarians. And I'm very happy that you highlighted the role that churches can play. And of course, how we can actually change mindset and attitudes of people and what your role can be. So we are looking forward to our cooperation. And thank you for coming and speaking up. The next speaker on my list would be Sonia Plaza or Dilip Radha from the World Bank. Please let me know if you are with us. World Bank colleague, Sonia or Dilip. If you are not here, I will jump to Spain and call Vladimir Paspel Revelo, Asociación Romina Hiu. Again, my apologies. Are you here, Vladimir?
Hola, sí, buenas tardes, buenos días.
Buenos
Saludos,
días.
mi nombre es Vladimir Pascuel. Soy un inmigrante de quien mucho en general representaría a las personas de las cuales está hablando. Y nosotros como inmigrantes que sufrimos la discriminación, primeramente pedir a los gobiernos que la discriminación, vamos a ganarle esta guerra a la discriminación siempre y cuando los gobiernos destinen recursos para crear políticas para que la discriminación y el racismo desaparezca. También queremos pedir que Naciones Unidas haga una declaración para que los partidos políticos dejen de atacar con discursos racistas a la población migrante. También decirles que aquí en España, en donde soy un inmigrante, una de las buenas prácticas es haberse creado el CEDRE, que es el Consejo contra la Discriminación Racial y Étnica, a través de la cual se da un servicio en todas las autonomías recogiendo los casos de discriminación. También hemos tenido la oportunidad de trabajar con la policía local para hacer ejemplos de buenas prácticas para que no se dé la discriminación. Sin embargo, la Policía Nacional, hay algunos ejemplos de Policía Nacional que a veces rayan en el racismo y la xenofobia. Por ello es importante que los estados desarrollen leyes para perseguir esas actitudes racistas. Luego también pedir a los gobiernos que tengan, primeramente que persigan también la discriminación institucional. A veces acudimos a las oficinas y se nos discrimina por ser mujer, por ser gay, por ser migrante, por ser negro. Creemos que también esta actitud es negativa y hace daño al país. Finalmente, para decirle al reverendo Jack, por ejemplo, que ha dicho que no sabe cómo, simplemente, estimado Jack, decirte, creo que tienes el púlpito y a través de allí deberías dar unas homilías instando a tu feligresía, a la feligresía en general, que no sea racista, que acoja a la gente, que simplemente cuando rezan el Padre Nuestro, decir que todos somos hermanos y que no me debes tratar mal, ni explotar, ni ser racista conmigo, porque también soy un hijo del Dios, cualquiera sea su nombre. Por lo tanto, creo que también desde los migrantes lo que queremos decirles que tenemos que buscar aliados, todo tipo de aliados para trabajar en contra de esta lacra social que es el racismo y la xenofobia. Felicitarles por esta herramienta que nos va a permitir seguir trabajando. Y también para finalizar, pido e insto a Naciones Unidas a crear indicadores para valorar, para ver cómo los gobiernos están creando políticas en favor, y creo que tenemos el objetivo 17, que es perseguir a la discriminación, para trabajar pues, con estos indicadores, para ver cómo los gobiernos están creando políticas positivas en favor de los migrantes para que no se dé la discriminación a las personas. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and also for emphasizing that it's a matter of investment and it's a matter of fighting. It just won't happen by itself, but governments need to take an active role and approach in protecting migrants and fight against especially structural forms of discrimination and racism. So thank you for that. And I'm sure that your call was heard. And let's see how we can act towards that together. And the next speaker on my list is Helena Olea from Alianza Americas. Helena, are you here?
Yes, hello, I'm here.
Hi,
Thank you for the opportunity. I think there are a couple of things that I want to highlight. I think it's important that we include in the definition of racial discrimination as well, ethnic discrimination. I think that we need to highlight the discrimination against Afro-descendants, but we also need to highlight the discrimination against indigenous peoples. And the challenge we have, we believe, is that discrimination is at the core of immigration policies, at the core of the distinctions in access to services, and of course, at the core of narratives against migrants. And so there are two concrete proposals that we have. The first is that we start looking into how migrants in conditions of vulnerability are being protected, what policies are being put in place, and how race and gender is being considered in those specific policies. And also that both in the regional reviews and in the IMRF, we go back to looking into indicators and assessing what specific changes in legislation, in policies, and in practices are being made. We need to move this discussion from Geneva to the country level. And we really count much on the network to help us do that. And we are on board in helping do our part so that we move to concrete action on this matter. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for this call and also for emphasizing that we need to be inclusive even also in our own approaches. So we need to pay attention to race, color, descent, national ethnic origin. And as you said, indigenous peoples are indeed one of the main victims. So let's keep all of these communities in mind when we are planning and designing protection measures for them. Thank you. The next speaker, if I see well, is Sheikh Mahmoud Naziri from Voices British Red Cross. And colleagues, just to say that we have 9 minutes left from the entire meeting. So if you can be quick. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rita and other colleagues, for giving me the time. And then I'm really pleased to be here in this big forum. Of course, lots of positive issue has been raised here, but still we can see discrimination in place, racism in place, dual standard in place, and the new laws and policies are going to be developed, which are all against the asylum seekers in migration. You know, you may know that the government of the UK has newly in place illegal migration bill, which they will stop all illegal, namely illegal migration to the United Kingdom, which for me, you know, if you see the documentaries, all those, you know, migrants that are coming, they are not coming for fun. There are lots of disaster in their own countries. Now we can see Sudan. We may expect it, you know, thousands of immigrants to come to flee because they're innocent people. They do not have any choice. They put their life in danger. They select either to be in their own country to die, or they will, you know, go through hardships to reach to a safe country. because otherwise, their life is in danger in any aspect of the life. But, however, our network is doing lots towards changing the policies and thinking, and then the practice through advocacy, communication, and campaigns, but that's not enough. Of course, there are lots of other partners. And then what I would like to propose that peace and beat activity, this strategy, all they're fine, but why? As I remember that the human rights-based approach should be considered. Why UN, global network on migration, they should put it on the bigger forum on the UN. The issue should be discussed where the all state representation are there. They should follow the uniform kind of approaches for the human rights-based approach towards refugee and migrations. We can see lots of dual standards. Okay, this is number one, a migrant because of their, race and other, specification. So it'd be good that we should all work together, and then should be discussing in a bigger picture, in a bigger forum, instead of doing peace and beat. But these issues, we can see lots of negative consequences on migrants and who are taking asylum seeker. For decades they are waiting that their status to be cleared, but still the accommodation, education, life situation, not having opportunity to do job, and then of course integration to the society, all are the major issue that of course UN migration network can do too much on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your concerns. Time is not enough, and time is also not enough today. I'm so sorry for that, but we have one more speaker on my list, Paddy Sianga Knutson, and if you could really finish in 2 minutes, I would appreciate. But thank you for bringing up irregular migration and also the complexity behind human mobility. That was really important for our discussion. Thank you. Paddy, are you with us now?
Yes, I am.
In 2 minutes, if you can. I'm sorry for that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the floor, and thank you to all the speakers from the working group, a very important working group. And I think a lot has been said, so I will try not to be repetitive, but just to re-emphasize a couple of points. I think the first one is that monitoring is key. I think that, from evidence that's been provided, even just looking into the chat, it's very interesting from sort of real life stories of what is impacting people now as we speak in this room in terms of discrimination and the ugly forms that it shows up, but I think all the way to what is actually not working. So I think what is a task for the GCM is particularly on the monitoring. I think that we've also heard how extensive the work, whether we, all the way to the member states that have provided some of their inputs, but also even when we look at the regional level and what's happening in terms of adopting the right frameworks. So I think we are not short of frameworks. We're definitely short of tools that allow us to monitor. And so that therefore, as GRFDT and as a civil society, those who work with civil society actors, we would welcome tools that allow that monitoring. And that kind of also brings me to another part of what is important for the GCM is the interaction between the work that has been provided by this working group and the work of the monitoring, the indicators working group, and how that has to be held quite tightly. I think it's very important for us to remain true to the definitions of what the GCM is expecting as well. And I think that's when we'll become true to the monitoring and we'll really be able to call a spade and be able to move on some of the things that have been sticking out for quite a long time. So I think we should not be limited by existing frameworks and really try to measure and take responsibility for what the GCM has put out at some of its ambitions. I think we also need to try something new, some things we've never tried before. And so I think that's some of the challenges that have come up today. I also wanted to just come in and talk about some of the grassroots work, which we think is essentially important. Many have shared about community leaders, religious leaders, And I think also this needs to be extended to the education sector. Can we open that up a little bit more into bridging intersectionality debate and bringing that debate to that kind of level, but also encouraging multiculturalism in order for us to rid these future societies from xenophobia, discrimination, segregation, and other things that relate to the ugliness that we show up that come out of systemic and structural discrimination and structural racism as it is seen in various spaces that have been explained. So we welcome an extensive discussion as well, very finally, in the GCM space. So through the regional mechanisms, the national mechanisms, I think that's the challenge that has to go. So even as we talk about these issues, I think it's very important that they are prioritized beyond discussions at the high level, so with the UN Migration Network, but that these are extended at the national level, and actually also most importantly in the informal spaces. So here we're also talking about the work that Canada, for instance, has highlighted earlier on the narratives roundtable and what that pertains, and how we really need to be looking at intra-regional issues, national issues, continental issues, and really trying to pick out the diversity of the issues around this topic and not lumping everything within one pot. And with that, I say thank you so much for giving us the space to be able to share.
Thank you so much, Paddy, and thank you for, again, refocusing our attention to the national level. And of course, the network is there exactly to support member states in their implementation of the GCM, and also, of course, to act as a source of ideas, tools, and data, information, and policy guidance. And also thank you for bringing up the measurements and monitoring. As we know, when we talk about migration and discrimination, there is a lot of lack. So there is a lack of awareness. There is a lack of disaggregated data. There's a lack of trust in officials and institutions. So we all need to think about how to overcome these gaps. So thank you for that. And colleagues, I have 1 minute. It would be impossible to summarize everything that you have been sharing today and recommending, but thank you so much. Of course, this is recorded and it will be shared, so it will be staying there for the future for our reference. And just to say that we have been recommending to take active measures to eliminate laws and policies that lead to discrimination. We've been talking about campaigns that promote togetherness and combat hate speech. We talked about different effective mechanisms, how we can recognize and promote the rights and dignity of migrants, how we can support whole of society approaches, ensure inclusivity in the various approaches. These are also, by the way, recommendations that the anti-racism workstream has issued on the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. As you heard, there are these 2 work streams on gender and racism. Of course, we are absolutely looking forward to hear from you, to work with you, to join our work streams and come with your ideas and recommendations. And since we are beyond time, all I need to do is to thank everybody who was in the background but didn't take the floor today necessarily. You have seen Stella and from Afford. My colleague Monica was not here, but thanks Jenna for being here, Caro, UN Women, Monami and Florence from the Network Secretariat, also from Ben from the technical support, and all the technical colleagues and the interpreters who enabled us to be together today. So please be in touch, find us, and we are looking forward to continue this discussion. That was the 3rd GCM talks. Thank you for being here, and we will continue the work and the struggle together. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a lovely day.